All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Episode 5. My name is Austin, by the way. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm on the FlexPoint team here. And I want to welcome you to the Modern Merchant podcast. The Modern Merchant is a place for online sellers to gain valuable insight into the modern world of multi-source and multi-channel commerce. And so today we came out with some great content. And what we want to talk about is what is a modern merchant. So today I've got Travis, CEO of FlexPoint, added to the podcast. And then I also have Matt, who is our CTO as well. Travis, Matt, welcome.
Hey.
Hey, good to be here.
All right. We can hear you. We can see you. Next time we'll have drinks. I guess we're not going to have it today, but we'll be sticking with this 5 o'clock podcast. I'm super excited about this. This is going to be a great start to, identifying what it really means to be a modern merchant. Obviously, that's our title of our YouTube and our brand. So let's go ahead and get jumped in. And I'm going to go ahead and read off a definition of what is a modern merchant. I think this is great. And we can break this down into a couple different sections. So a modern merchant is a retailer, distributor, or brand that believes in a flexible and agile supply chain paired with a diversified multi-channel sales strategy. So let's start simple. Let's start at the beginning. And we're going to talk about who is a modern merchant. So we already talked about the 3 there. And Travis, I'm going to send this over to you for the first one because we see this all the time. We get people mixed up all the time on, am I a retailer? Am I a brand? Am I a supplier? It's like all these words are just like loosely defined. So in your words, give us a breakdown of those 2 personas, retailers and brands, because again, I think they get mixed up a lot.
Yeah. And that's really kind of, where we started using this term modern merchant, right? Because, whether you're a retailer or brand, it's really about just kind of having a more really kind of diversified, sourcing and supply chain, as well as sales and distribution strategy. And so if you're a brand, right, traditionally, you're going to see that you own the product and that you're reselling out to a retailer, and you go through that standard traditional, whether it's direct to consumer or through that standard traditional like distributor or to a retailer typically buying from the brand and then, reselling it to the consumer. The whole modern merchant side of things is you can be a brand, you can be a retailer, you can be a distributor. You can be any one of those within that traditional supply chain, but it's really about kind of breaking outside of that very linear supply chain, right? A great example is a brand that's a more modern merchant is a brand that does go direct to consumer, also sells through the traditional supply chain, might supplement and augment their catalog with some drop shipping, additional merchandise and almost retail that additional assortment that's outside of their brand, right? So that's a modern merchant that kind of blurs those lines between brand and retailer. Same thing with a retailer, right? They might act as a retailer, which we traditionally call someone that is reselling a brand's products directly to consumers, but they might also have a B2B side of their business where they are selling at a wholesale price to other businesses, right? Maybe it's just a certain segment of their own brand. You've seen, like, you go to a grocery store and Costco's got that Kirkland brand. And they might, they sell those direct to consumer, but you could sell those directly to businesses too. So it's a blurry line there between what is truly a brand, distributor, retailer. A lot of these modern merchants are all 3.
Yeah, that's a good point. And kind of to piggyback off of that, right? A distributor, sometimes we call it a supplier, or sometimes, we or other people, retailers, call them a vendor, is, someone that does buy in bulk, whether that's, all of their different brands, right? Let's say Unify and Honest Green buying in all of these eco-friendly brands that they work with and have relationships with. And then what they do is they bring that in bulk, and they're kind of the logistical fulfillment, experts, right? They bring it all in bulk and then they resell to other businesses. It's kind of that main distributor fulfillment and supply chain. And then at the same time, like you said, right, a modern merchant that is a brand could kind of, say that they are a distributor because they do sell in bulk to other businesses as well. So it definitely is loosely defined, but being a modern merchant, we're going to talk more about that here in a second. And it's always good to define those 3 different personas.
Yeah, and real quick on that, like it's funny because we talk about terminology a lot. It's all relational, really. Like someone is a supplier to you, right? You can supply things. So I mean, really, it's like when we talk about suppliers a lot, and you'll see it in different content in e-commerce. It's really about someone that is providing goods in any form. But you're right, a brand, typically a distributor, a wholesaler, right? All under the supplier umbrella, because there's typically supplying, and then we segment between supplier and then retailer, which is pretty clearly defined as someone typically reselling products directly to consumer. But depending on who you talk to, that terminology can differ.
Yeah, we hear that a bunch. So let's go ahead and dive into that first part of that definition besides who they are. So the first thing that stands out to me, and this is really important, is what is a flexible and agile supply chain and why is it important? So we're going to break this down onto like what a modern merchant, feels that something is flexible and agile. And Travis, let's start it with you. What would you say in your own words is a flexible and agile supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, it's what it basically sounds like, right? I mean, when we talk about a modern merchant, it is getting outside of that, breaking out that side of that barrier of that traditional supply chain. I guess it's probably worth talking about what that is. The traditional supply chain is a retailer buying from a distributor who has bought from a brand, right? And going through that traditional supply chain and then bring it all in-house and storing it in typically one warehouse is all they have the capacity to manage. We're not talking about the top 1% of the Walmarts and Targets and those of the world, and Amazons, obviously, who have done a lot of this already and have been doing it for years. But the mid-market retailer would buy in bulk, store it in one warehouse, maybe in a brick and mortar as well, and then ship it out until on their online store e-commerce orders until they're out of it, and reorder ideally a little bit prior to that so they don't have any stockouts. So the more flexible agile is what we kind of refer to a lot of times as distributed fulfillment, where you have your own warehouse where you have inventory there. You've got your brick and mortar that you have, obviously inventoried in your inventory system that you have different, quantity in a different location there. You also might maybe drop shipping the same products and having that same product in another location. And lastly, you might have a third-party fulfillment service that you work with, like a Ship Hero or 3PL Central or one of those guys like that's strategically on another side of the country or international or whatever. So I guess to sum it up, having that same product available in multiple different locations that can be sourced at any given time, depending on where that order is coming from or any kind of business logic that you have in place, that's what we think about as a flexible and agile supply chain.
Yeah, and I think the term agile stands out to me the most because in a again, the traditional supply chain, right? I'm buying in bulk, all of these eco-friendly goods because I have like this eco-friendly brick and mortar store. And at the end of the day, someone really wants that Tom soap, right? And it's kind of like, well, I'm out of stock. Sorry, can't be my customer, right? Instead, modern merchants are more agile in the sense of, oh, we might be out of stock here in the brick and mortar store, but we have it available online, and then people can go online and either purchase it there, or they're just always in stock on their website. And then what you're able to do is use some type of system and different logic. Obviously, FlexPoint helps out where you can source that product from all these different locations that you're mentioning. So it is being agile and not having out of stock products, and making that as best as possible. So one thing that I want to hit on too, there's a quote from the blog that we wrote, and I really like this, and I think this is a nice little segue over to Matt. So it says, this integrated and agile supply chain strategy allows them to offer a more extensive product assortment and more reliable inventory availability than their competitors. So again, kind of hitting on what I was talking about. And Matt, I'm going to swing this over to you. And what would you say is the most common way, people can integrate their supply chain?
Yeah. So just briefly to touch on the flexible and agile stuff, flexible to kind of expand it from a tech side is every supplier out there, every brand, whatever terminology you're integrating with, they have some sort of different format of data too. And so another big piece to the flexibility is being able to actually integrate with them, right? Without having to reinvent the wheel every single time. And I know that that's, one of the main value props that we try to provide. And then agile also, right? Obviously being agile and being able to provide them a product and be able to give them, fulfill on that order that they submit to you, but also in the sense that as you grow and scale, you want to be agile to add new suppliers, add new distributors to your wheelhouse, and have that kind of form into a cohesive fulfillment solution, and just be able to be now a new location of availability. And so we see that a lot. And it's funny, when I thought of this, it's really the same thing as tech. It's just in a different concept, where, a good example from a technology perspective is if you want to build a system, you add new servers as you need capacity, right? And you could think of those servers as being suppliers in this case, right? If one of them fails over, you've got a kind of backup failover to go to fulfill on that item or whatever it may be. So that type of solution definitely comes into play. And if you don't mind, just maybe repeating that question, I'll dive into that second part.
Well, you kind of hit on it. I mean, it's talking about like the different ways people integrate to suppliers, or really the most common way. It kind of segues in that, like, obviously flexible, and we try to be agile and flexible from an integration perspective, but like how most people commonly integrate, like what do you see as like the most common ways?
Yeah, so this is obviously a question that we ask ourselves a lot, because we are trying to do our best to build solutions that will meet a lot of these needs, right? And so one of the most common ones is just pure files, right? People transmit files, and this industry, a large portion of suppliers and vendors use files. Sometimes that's in a very specific EDI format, which some of the more bigger names are probably familiar with. Sometimes it's just standard like CSV, TSV files that people are transmitting, usually over FTP or email or some other kind of direct download. So just being able to, take a file, parse through it, make sense of it, import that data, map it in, maybe even build rules on that. That's a common use case these days. The other common one is people are on systems out there. A lot of, not everybody, maybe smaller brands aren't, but even smaller brands generally gravitate towards a system. Maybe that's a POS system. Maybe that's a system like Shopify or BigCommerce that they're leveraging to give access to their distributors. And so a lot of times, just having interconnected systems like that, when you meet a brand and they say, oh, we're on Shopify, you can kind of leverage a pre-existing integration. So I would say most of it is a file-based connection. Second most is probably being on a different system or platform that can be integrated to. And you do have the occasional proprietary, custom, homegrown solutions that people integrate to, but those are usually few and far between. So just having at least a file structure or an existing platform that we can integrate to usually handles most of that.
And we're seeing more of that, right? Where in the past it was always proprietary systems, and everyone was siloed, and it was tough to integrate together. And because more and more people are moving to a platform that has an open API, right? Having an API is the standard nowadays, to be able to connect to other systems. That's kind of leading to this concept of a modern merchant, which, I love that Matt brought up the idea of like the modern merchant and being more agile and flexible in their business operations. It's very similar to just running a tech company like we do, right? I've always kind of drawn the conclusion that it's very similar. Like the move to drop shipping and distributed order management, distributed fulfillment is very similar to like the on-premise move to the cloud, right? There's all the same barriers, all the same issues, all the same real trust issues in doing it that prevent people, almost like scoff at it. Drop shipping, I don't drop ship, that's crazy, right? Like there's some business problems that prevent people from doing it, which all makes sense, but those that are able to leverage it and take the jump can see the advantages in it, right? Like, the trust issue thing is like the greatest example. You're relying a lot more on your network now and other people, that if you don't have the right network, like the same, if you're relying on AWS, it goes down, right? In the cloud infrastructure. But the advantage of outsourcing and having more of a network fulfillment model versus, your server in-house, which is equivalent to your one single warehouse, and having to maintain that and all the costs and, be an expert in that. I've always thought that we're riding this wave of dropship that is very early and people accepting it, even though people have been doing it for years. It's tough to implement, and that it's very similar to the adoption of cloud. The last piece of that is exactly what Matt's saying, like more platforms, more open APIs out there. That technology is enabling us to get there, and get past these kind of rigid integration systems that hopefully will allow for an easier integration and more trust between the partners.
Yeah. I think one thing too for being a modern merchant, going back to just identifying your supply chain, I think most people that we say are modern merchant understand all the different ways you can connect, right? Like how many people do we talk to who say, I want to connect to a CVS file? And it's like, come on, like, it's like different, not knowing different file formats, not knowing like what an API is. What back in the day, everybody just loosely exchanged EDI, but it could be file based. And then they're just saying EDI all the time as more of a holistic electronic data interchange. And just like I just feel like understanding all the different ways people can connect is a step in the right direction for people to get to the point of being a modern merchant. Just so we all know all these different ways we can connect, because all of these suppliers that you might work with or vendors that you might work with that you source products from, there could be a bunch of different ways that they can allow you to connect to them as well. So just kind of wrapping a bow on that.
Yeah, more digital focused, digital first, tech savvy, for sure. I mean, even the largest traditional retailers, brick and mortar, COVID hit them pretty bad, but for years they didn't make a priority, but they were hiring and saying we need to get better about online. But it's more than that. It's about understanding all it's becoming a tech company. People talk about how modern companies in general have to become like a media company with all the content you're producing, like we're doing now, and become experts in media production, right? And distributing your content. Same thing with modern retailers and brands. You have to become somewhat of a tech company, or at least leverage the right tech partners. So there's no doubt it's more than just kind of hiring the guy to run your social media and run your website. It's having a more tech digital focused culture within the retailer or brand.
Yeah. All right, excellent. So let's go ahead and dive into like the second part of what a modern merchant is. And obviously we talked about the supply chain, flexible and agile, everything that's about that. Now the next thing is a diversified multi-channel sales strategy, and obviously talking about why that's important. So Travis, we'll start this out with you. And I mean, it's funny because like having multi-channels, selling different places, not just selling on your website, but all these different other areas. It just kind of depends on who the business is, where they see sales coming from. This is more, I would say, talking about the guys that are really moving volume and are that high volume sellers. So what to you is like a good example of people selling, in all these different sales channels? Like what's a good strategy that we see a lot?
Yeah, I want to talk specifically because I know there's been a lot of talk already and for years talking about, I sell my website and I sell on Amazon and I sell on Walmart. Like we're not talking about that. Really what we're talking about today in the theme of a modern merchant is, we talk about the blurry line between retailer, brand, distributor. It's more to me the B2B versus B2C, which, early in my career in e-commerce and just retail in general, I used to walk the trade shows all the time, and there'd be, these brands that would sell direct, they would resell their products to retailers, and they'd have like a secret retail brand as well, and it was kind of this thing like, yeah, we also resell, and it's kind of like the no, and there's other wholesalers out there they would use as their advantage, say we only sell to retailers, we don't sell direct to consumer. We've seen this whole direct to consumer movement start, so it is a true blurry line. So when we talk about multi-channel strategy, it's about multi-channel B2B, B2C to me, at least in this context of this discussion, where how to appease your resellers, or in some industries, they call them their dealers, right? I saw a kayak company who has blown up, and I consulted with a little bit years ago, do this really well. And they went direct to consumer like a lot of brands do, but they also, really promoted their dealers, and they managed their dealers in a way that, they were able to manage their pricing differently, obviously, right? The wholesale pricing, but even another level of, here's our wholesale dealers, here's only our pure dropship dealers, here's our dealers that, have not hit a certain volume, and they get different pricing. So managing that B2B relationship of everyone reselling your product, as well as appeasing them with the technology, right? They're not going to force them to go through a B2B portal or even their website to place every order when they're placing, dozens of dropship orders with them a day. So it's about having a strategy for anyone can connect to their sales channel. That's easy, that's fine. But how do you manage your assortment of products that go on your sales channel, direct to consumer site, the sales channel B, your Amazon, channel that, only have a certain amount of products and fulfillment sources you trust to ship out in Amazon's strict guidelines. And then C, your resellers, your B2B kind of relationships. How do you, provide the correct pricing, incentives for them to work with you, and just kind of work across all those channels in a intelligent way to make sure you're not, hurting the other one by benefiting one of the others.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's kind of goes, I agree with you, right? We see this a lot where people are selling B2B and B2C, and that is kind of where we see our modern merchants, or what we categorize as a modern merchant. But at the same time, the higher volume guys are not just selling on a Shopify, but they are doing Walmart and Amazon, maybe multiple Shopify sites, maybe multiple BigCommerce sites, WooCommerce sites, things like that. Maybe even selling through all of these other miscellaneous channels. And it's funny because once people start shifting from one website to 2 to 3 to marketplaces to B2B to like all of these different, realms of getting revenue through the door, it gets really unwieldy on managing it, all those orders from all these different channels and trying to do everything manual. And this is what I want to get Matt, your opinion on is, like how crazy can this be manually, and what's like the barriers that people need to start trying to get over to start integrating, start automating, start making their lives a little bit easier from that perspective?
Yeah, so it's a very loaded question. There's obviously a lot of variables in that.
A lot.
The first one is volume. So anytime somebody says manual process, it's not inherently bad, right? The only time a manual process is bad is if it's impeding you from making progress, right? I have to have 3 people dedicated to just processing orders all day, and that's very tedious and it takes up their time and they're not able to work on other things, for example. That's when manual process becomes bad. But if you're doing small volume or something like that, generally speaking, you don't really have an issue with manual processes. So that's the first part. So it doesn't really become unwieldy at small volumes, in my opinion. And the second variable to that would be like, what's the importance of centralizing the data? So, when you think about, again, small volume, it doesn't really matter too much, but as the volume increases, you may want to start reporting on profitability. You may want to report on sales reports and understand your sales volume on certain channels versus other channels, right? And all of these analytics that you gain access to the second you centralize some of that data. And so centralization becomes important when it gets to that, when it gets to, I need to analyze the data, or I have so much volume that it's too tedious for me to do this manually. And when that happens, the idea of overcoming hurdles, obviously there are hurdles initially to like integrate to a system, and you have to understand those workflows. Leveraging, partners like us that have kind of done that due diligence ahead of time definitely helps out, because you don't have to learn all the intricacies of every, channel that you're working with. But basically, I mean, at the end of the day, it really becomes important when you start hitting a certain scale, when you start needing to really leverage the data to make decisions. Yes. Then you want to actually start progressing into that, right?
I'm curious your thoughts. I was thinking about this earlier, like just on the B2B side, because I do want to kind of double down there, just because I think it is pretty unique on what we're seeing there now, and people trying to dive into the B2B when they might have traditionally done, direct to consumer or whatever. From the technology side, the differences there and the challenges that you've seen, because I know we've seen a lot of different things you have implemented specifically for that reseller channel and those kinds of clients.
Sure. Yeah, so when it comes to B2B, I mean, you think about B2C, the first step to a B2C interaction is that you're advertising the prices ahead of time. At the end of the day, you make a sale. That's the end of it. There's no, they put their credit card on file or cash, and you make that sale, and that's it. B2B is different, right? So B2B, one of the most obvious differences, you have different pricing. So you need a way to manage pricing from a B2B versus B2C. But the more intricate things are the actual flow of, you could say, payment or invoicing from that B2B. So, I mean, there's a ton of challenges. Like, let's say you want to get really advanced with B2B and you want to create different groups. And I want to give different pricing tiers to group A versus group B. And maybe I want to give a discount to this group or reduce the shipping cost to that group, or, because they have such high volume that they're a good, reliable reseller of mine, and I'd like to give them an advantage, right? So you have that problem. Like, how do you separate resellers into groups? How do you adjust their pricing and their shipping costs based on their group that they're in? That's a problem that you have to solve depending on the system you're in, as well as, an order comes in from that reseller. How do I handle that? Do I have him on some sort of terms, like credit terms? Do I charge him immediately when that order comes in? For example, in FlexPoint, there's kind of an authorization flow where, we don't actually charge that reseller right away. We actually allow them to authorize the order to transmit down. So if they get a fraud order or something like that, they can interject. Or if they want to automatically authorize up to a certain amount, we allow that too. So really, when you think about B2B, you have a different entity in the equation now, where you're charging a reseller, you're giving them specific pricing, you're kind of invoicing them and giving them their own B2B transaction, right, in addition to their consumer transaction that they received. So it just adds another layer, and there's a lot of workflows to kind of consider and potentially customize depending on how involved you want to get.
Yeah, it's easy to just, there's a lot of technology out there built to just accept someone checks out on your website, pays with a credit card one time, comes back a week later, hopefully. But to send in automated orders every day without having to manually go tell you what they're buying, you need to have the API, you need to have EDI set up, right? Whatever. And then it was kind of, early on, I guess it's a shock at the time, but it makes a lot of sense now. And I get it. Most of those are not set up to just have a card on file and you just get the transaction. Like, you don't keep the card on file with Shopify, even though they're integrated with Stripe, and Stripe protects all that stuff, right? But just the simple fact of like, oh, how do I accept a repeat order from a customer? There's shockingly, a lot of these e-commerce systems that won't allow you to just keep a card on file.
Yeah,
for sure.
Keeping a card on file and automatically charging that card on file, right? Like, how many people have we talked to where it's like it's someone's daily process of just, going in, copy and pasting credit card information and hitting a button to get that into their bank. It's pretty crazy where, a system could be doing that for them. And I think another thing, at least a good point to note is MAP, right? Minimum advertising price. That's such a huge thing for people selling, to other businesses, is if they are doing a direct to consumer and direct to businesses, doing both a B2B and B2C, like, they want to make sure that their retailers aren't selling below their own. And usually a MAP is like a great way of leveling the playing field. But then having systems in place to help enforce MAP, because how many times do we hear people getting kicked off or getting yelled at or getting in trouble with selling, below MAP on Amazon and their website and these different sales channels? So another nuanced thing to kind of think of.
Yeah, and a great point about this. For years when we would, onboard customers, it would be, I have this Shopify store for my B2C, and I have this other Shopify store for my B2B, right? And that's kind of a common, it doesn't have to be Shopify. Replace it with WooCommerce, BigCommerce, whatever it may be. But that's kind of a common, theme that we've seen. And to your point, right, those other systems aren't really designed for, they don't have a map field in Shopify, for example, on the outbound. And so if you're trying to enforce data, right, that is a very different flow from a B2B transaction versus B2C, where in B2B, I'm giving you, what you can charge for it. So the cost, in your case, what the cost would be for you, but I'm also giving you restrictions of, even though that's your cost, you can't go below this amount, this map. And, in a B2C transaction, you don't do that, right? And so there are a lot of nuances too, not only to the ordering, the invoicing, and the payment of all of that, but also to transmitting the data for them to actually be able to sell those items, right? That's a challenge in its own, to give them updated, accurate inventory information consistently throughout the day as you get orders, and have them be able to reflect that too. So a ton of challenges when it comes to that realm, and kind of, especially if you're someone that's used to the B2C, trying to get into the B2B, for sure.
Yeah, and underserved, right? Like, we go back to this, like, top 1%, even like, let's say the top 10%, they've got systems in place, ERPs and things like that, but most of them archaic, most of them all file-based type stuff, or, EDI, but it's the modern merchant is a small, agile, up-and-comer, right? There's a lot more people kind of, able to start a company and get it up to a couple million, 10 million in a year, 2, 3 years, whatever. They're not implementing they're putting off ERP implementation as long as possible, right? And so it's flexible and agile is not just in the supply chain, but it's also definitely in the technology. not taking a year to implement SAP, right? Or a year plus and dropping 6 figures on implementation. It's a little more of a stair-step agile approach.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Good note to finish that on. And this next question that I wanted to hit on is probably pretty loaded as well. We could probably talk about this for a while. So we'll start with you, Travis, but I want both of y'all's opinion on this. There's a lot of companies out there that integrate, and then I put in quotations, automates to pretty much all your big sales channels, right? So Shopify, Amazon, WooCommerce, Magento, all the marketplaces, all the sales channels, everybody integrates to everybody. Would you guys say one modern merchant, right? Or someone that wants to be a modern merchant. Let's talk about that, because if you're a modern merchant, you have a system that integrates to all your channels and supply chain and makes, things easier and automated. But if someone wants to get to the point of being a modern merchant and implementing something to help integrate and automate, how does one go about evaluating and choosing the right system to integrate and automate? Like, what's the first step? What's the questions to ask yourself? Where do you start? Things like that. So what do you think, Travis? What pops up for you?
Yeah, I think you look at where the biggest opportunity is that you're missing, and at the same time, where the biggest time suck is that you're spending a lot of your time on that you probably shouldn't be. So looking at that, it can differ from each business. It could be manually entering tracking numbers, or manually placing orders, or uploading new products because you have a ton of new products coming in and you have a large catalog of dropship distributors, whatever it might be. It's looking at that, and then unfortunately, it's pretty broken, if you ask me right now, in the whole process of evaluating new software. We're part of that problem too. You come and we try to do as much as we possibly can by give videos up front so you can watch it. We want to we're a fairly robust system, so we're not at the whole free trial stage yet. But just in general, it's and even if you have a free trial, it's very tough to really fully understand a piece of software if it's going to fit your needs. You typically need to talk with someone. So as far as like getting to that next step, it starts with a checklist of what you want. And then it's really just the process of, internet research and getting out there and doing the free trials, doing the demos, but keeping track of, in a spreadsheet or whatever, of really the needs you're trying to solve. That's step one. A lot of times people might not know what they want, so that checklist evolves as you talk to each company. But that's typically the start.
Matt, what do you think?
Yeah. So I could probably talk about this for an hour. So I'll try to keep it brief. But I think Travis made a good point. Like, you have to define your requirements on what you actually need to accomplish, right? That's obviously a big thing. You have to understand the intricacies of your business. So, for example, how do you determine where to send an order today, right? Like, you have a process that you do today, whether it's manual or instinctual or whatever it is. When I get an order, if I could potentially fulfill this from 2 different places, I make a decision on where to send that from, right? And so understanding all the intricacies, those pieces of what you do today and what you would like to do, for example, is very important in kind of assessing when you're looking at platforms. Do they check this box? Do they check this box? The first thing I'll say is it's obviously daunting picking a platform, right? There's so many out there. So many of them do some things very similar, but completely, don't do other problems and things like that. It's very difficult to kind of assess. But what I would generally do and recommend to somebody in this position is understand your pillars, right? Where does your inventory live at, right? Is a big question. And so what is the source of truth for your inventory? If you have a distributor, their CSV file that they provide you every hour, maybe the source of truth for inventory, right? If you have another system, then that source of truth, right, might be like a Shopify integration or something like that. If you understand where all the pieces of the puzzle are, it becomes a lot easier to actually put that puzzle together, right? So I know my inventory lives there. I know I can get updates at X amount of time. And I know that when I get that, my ultimate goal is to then update my Shopify site, my Magento site, or my Amazon listings with that new inventory data. And so understanding those pieces, then you can go into a conversation, check a few boxes to make sure the software is a general fit, go into these sales calls, while you're consulting these different platforms, and basically explain these pieces, how they need to work, and the nuances, in between them. Where your order is coming from, where do they ultimately need to get to? How does that system accept those orders, right? Like, if you understand those pieces, then you can actually make an educated assessment of, will this platform be able to accommodate those use cases or not, and be able to make an educated decision on what you should kind of go with.
Yeah, I would say too, like once you start evaluating, number one, exactly like what we talked about earlier, what's the pain point and what do you need to solve that pain point, right? Let's start there. And then next is, okay, I'm tired of having 3 people dedicated to manually, processing orders when I could be using them for marketing purposes. Like, we need to help automate our ordering process. That's the number one thing to go for. And then from there, it's kind of like evaluating, okay, what softwares are out there? I mean, we've talked about this, the likes of a G2, a Capterra, a lot of these different, companies out there that talk about some of the best softwares out there. And then going from there, I think the big, thing to do is if the company is not able to tailor a demo, like like they can go into the use cases, give you a full blown, share screen and give you a demo and show you how all of these different operations can help solve these pain points. I think you're probably not talking to the right person. And at the same time, I would say to help with that evaluation process of making sure that it is solving it is do you need someone like a company to a third-party integrator to help like just connect systems together, or do you need like pure true automation, right? Do you need to solve every use case of orders coming in from all these different sales channels and outlets to be fully and completely automated and not like hands-on, a group of people to like, that's my everyday thing is I'm catching orders from here and there. And I'm like making sure I'm processing it to the right suppliers and vendors and warehouses and things like that. So I think that's kind of what I see as like the evolution of that, evaluating, third-party integrators.
Yeah, and the one piece I'll add is generally the most successful customers that I've seen at least are ones that come in not attempting to automate everything day one, right? It's like you can overlook a lot of things trying to automate initially. And my recommendation generally is try to do what you're doing today, right? Today, if you have manual processes or whatever it is, just try to at least replicate that in whatever system you choose to go with. And then find the wins, find the automation wins of, I don't actually have to upload a file. You can pull that for me. Great. I don't have to, check to see if it's from Hawaii to flag that order as a different type of shipment or something like that. Great. So like, find the quick wins after that, but try to replicate what you do in the system. And, even if it's just in theory while you're evaluating, right, you don't have to actually do that, but try to replicate it in your mind and understand where the potential gains are of automation. And then you can see, is this a good fit or not? Yeah. Maybe they don't have any automation where you need it or something like that.
Yeah. The migration's hard enough, right? Do it one-to-one first. And we always talk about the phase two automate. Yeah,
always get phase 2, break it out in phases. And once everybody's like, yeah, that sounds great. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. It's a perfect way of migrating any system or getting up on any brand new system to make sure systems work, right?
I was coming back to like, with great power comes great responsibility. Like automation is like, it applies there. We automate a lot of stuff with our marketing automation software, HubSpot, and the more you automate, the more you have to track and understand where is that. If I press this button, what pops up over here? If I turn this knob, what flips over here? So it's like, trying to do that all at once. It's funny because everyone does want to do it all at once, but the more savvy customers for sure understand. Let's get migrated to any new system that empowers them to be more of a modern merchant, more agile, more flexible, and then starts knocking out the quick wins like Matt said.
Yeah, you went pure Uncle Ben Spider-Man quote there.
I love that.
Yeah, man, love Uncle Ben. And another thing that kind of
it was some like philosopher, right?
It was, but we're sticking to Uncle Ben and Spider-Man because that's the childhood.
The guy in the rice. I was like, there's no way the rice guy.
I can't remember what it was. That was a good one. But one thing to note as well is, I would say that whenever you're going and you are evaluating a third party too, and it takes me back to what you said, Matt, earlier, is one who's got the analytics, because at the end of the day, you're going to need analytics to make business decisions if you really want to grow your business or scale it or really have any, any goal that you want to accomplish. So the analytical side is a really big important thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about. But the thing is, with analytics comes great responsibility, and it's the responsibility of owning the data, right? So who can actually like house and own all of that data? Because you can't just like say, oh, we've got all this great order analytics side of things or whatever, but you don't house data of like integrating to your vendors and your suppliers. So how do you know these are your best suppliers? Like, how do you know these are your best sources? How do you know you can rely on this person more than this other company? So I think that's like the underlining thing that maybe we should have a whole other podcast for, is like the analytical side of things and the data management too. So I think that's a huge thing to kind of wrap up on. So let's go ahead and jump into this last quote. And I really like this one because this could go in a bunch of different directions. And this was on our blog, and I thought this was great. So I'm going to read this off for you guys. So modern merchants are less reactive and more proactive about investing in solutions that will increase their agility and capacity to meet their obligations to their customers. So Travis, out of that quote, what stands out to you? What's kind of a last thought that we can wrap this up with?
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in this post-COVID and just, this retail apocalypse kind of last 5 years really of talking about how retail has been sitting back and just happy and okay with how things are going from a brick and mortar perspective, and has not really gotten serious about digital. Like I said, I think every big retailer that has gone out of business had a e-commerce department, right? But we've seen a lot go out. That's not getting serious about it. So I don't want to like harp on that, because everyone, it happens the best of businesses. But it's being more proactive about making technology a priority, and making it, really kind of a new strategy that you have to embrace fully. It's not just adding the same exact assortment you have in your store online. It's about, implementing new systems and rethinking what you're doing completely from, just this traditional supply chain to this more flexible, agile supply chain we talk about. So getting in front of it like that. But then also the other piece of that is being more proactive in making sure that you have the partnerships in place, that you have, this supply chain that can fulfill on certain runs when you have this huge run on a certain item, right? Like a lot of traditional supply or retailers, they've had these reordering rules where if it goes down to a certain stock, they issue a PO and they get the PO into their warehouse. That's great. But if it's a run and everyone's doing that, and you can't get the PO out quick enough and get it into your own warehouse, whatever it might be, you want to be the one that's already set up to drop ship and can take that order right then and there. So, I mean, that's being proactive in like setting up these relationships, setting up these integrations to be the one merchant that does have stock, right? And doesn't have to overcommit. So it's taking that mentality in the same vein, the same, theme of the modern merchant being a blurry line between retailer, brand, distributor, all that. It's if for whatever reason, consumer spending drops, but you've opened up an arm of the B2B side of things that for whatever reason, the economy is flourishing. It's being proactive and opening up those channels and thinking about not just sitting back and resting on your laurels because you're in the mall and people are coming in the mall and you're making a ton of money, right? It's being proactive and being, agile and being prepared to be agile. Let's put it that way. So that's the way that I think about that reactive versus proactive and how it relates to the more modern merchant.
Yeah, I like that. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, an interesting take on this. It's kind of like a survivor bias. Like the modern merchants that are proactive are still around to some extent, and the ones that haven't been have unfortunately, faced slow times and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, it's a competitive environment, right? You're in the internet, you're in an online ecosystem. Anybody can get up and running within a few days, but they can't build infrastructure in a few days, right? They can't build the relationships to these various brands and suppliers. They can't build integrate all of that into a system that allows you to quickly, switch fulfillment sources when one goes out of stock or when one all of a sudden raises their prices. Like you can't build that overnight. And so it's kind of like somebody recognizing that this is a competitive ecosystem and I have to be able to adapt and be able to offer things, whether that's stock, whether that's the best price at the best time, whether that's extremely reliable inventory updates, so I don't get a ton of oversells that I have to cancel or discredit my reputation because I didn't have those items in stock at the time. So I think people are just cognizant of the fact that it's these modern merchants are cognizant of the fact that this is a competitive ecosystem. In order to compete and to build my brand and to build a successful fulfillment kind of logistical network for selling products, I need to be proactive and I need to integrate these things and need to be able to make decisions on them. Like, for example, if I do have a run on sale, I need to be able to react to that and determine, did that happen at a certain time for a certain reason? Is there any way I can increase my margins on that? Is there any way I can order some of those in-house and have some of those ready to go in case if this happens again, right? Like all of that involves analytics, it involves integration, it involves, automation, getting that information updated quickly. And you're just going to naturally be in a more secure and competitive situation if you do those things. And a lot of the people that we see, thriving in these times are kind of taking those principles on, right? They're kind of adapting to that. And so that was my take on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think for me personally, I think it's the cost saving side, being proactive on saving costs, whether it's tech or labor cost or anything, right? We see people that build their own proprietary system that they've been running for 10 years and they're like, I put millions of dollars into this where I could have been using a third party to pay a 16th of the cost, right? Things like that. So for me, I think a modern merchant is proactive in saving time, saving cost based off of, all of their different supply chain and their sales channels, and offloading that time and cost into more important things, which is, in my opinion, getting customers, getting sales.
Yeah.
You're selling online to make sales, to drive revenue, have a brand.
Yeah, and if I can add one more piece to that, it kind of goes back to the cloud analogy of, historically, there weren't the AWSs of the world. So the people that built the competitive advantage were those that had a really good, site load time and infrastructure. Like Amazon had a big spiel about, if the site loads in less than a second, we increase our sales by X amount. There was a big article on that. And how they use that to their advantage. And one of their biggest competitive advantage at the time was a very fast performing site that has access to, thousands and hundreds of thousands of products. Yeah. And in today's world, it's not really about, like that homegrown solution. Like there are now flex points out there, there's the NetSuites and things like that. There are systems that you can use that will give you basically everything you need from a technological advantage to compete with these larger retailers. And at this point, it's really about, to your point, like picking really curated suppliers and distributors that you work with, having very, fast fulfillment times, reliable fulfillment times, and, curating your product catalog to be, excellent products at good prices, right, with decent availability. And so it's starting to get more into that realm. And we're kind of in this era now where people can put more focus into that rather than the tech behind the scenes because of platforms like ours that are kind of up and coming.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit. There's a book, it's a really old book, and I'm blanking on the name of the title, but it's about like most of all IT and technology becoming a commodity, right? It's no longer a competitive advantage. But I like your take on that, Matt, where it's like it was, and it can be for a certain period of time until it's no longer. And in the book, it basically talks about, I would love for at some point on YouTube, someone to comment the book title. It's like on the tip of the tongue. But, basically the thought is that if that's the case, it all goes down to like right now, we touched on the analytics side and data being like kind of that competitive advantage that you can use. And then building technology to better crunch that data, the big data kind of systems out there are a competitive advantage until they no longer are, which eventually it will become commoditized, right? And it's funny just seeing that, we're kind of in that point now where, those proprietary systems of loading a website really fast was an advantage, but no longer is. And little piece of technology will keep on going down that path.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of good insights from you guys. We are about to get rocked by a massive storm right now. It's a light show out the window over here on the other side of the office. So let's go ahead and finish off here. You guys have any closing thoughts?
I'll just go quick. I mean, not really. I think just in general, we've talked about it, but the modern merchant to us is really one that just kind of is not really held down to the bounds of traditional retail supply chain. And I'm really excited to see, in my career in the cloud, I worked in the cloud, rode that wave. I see that similar thing happening here where things are shifting, that technology and just the appetite within the industry is kind of converging. So I think we're going to see some really cool stuff. And, this new merchant that we're talking about will be past the D2C kind of run and all that stuff. It's be more about this, this connected network of merchants and the retailer and the brand and the supplier, all that is going to kind of merge. So it'll be really cool to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. Nothing really more to add on my side, but
nothing more to add besides let's get some more Uncle Ben quotes going in here. Just keep sprinkling those in. All right. Well, appreciate you guys jumping on today on the podcast, talking about what is a modern merchant. So if you guys like the podcast, go ahead and check us out. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, here on YouTube, live streaming. Make sure to subscribe to those. If you guys have any more questions, head to flexpoint.com. Go ahead and drop us a note, as well as go check out our modern merchant blog as well to subscribe. So having said that, thanks guys for jumping on, and we'll see you on the next one.
Well, appreciate it.
All right.
Yep,
See you, everybody.
man.